Hey guys, how's it going? Iissham here, and today we're going to be going over how to deal with burst in Shadowlands. Before we get started with the video, if you are new to my YouTube channel, I am a 3.3k plus multi-rank 1 Resto Shaman aiming to bring high-level arena, guides, and more educational videos like this one. So if you like what you see, consider subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a comment, as it all helps with the YouTube algorithm. I also have a Twitch channel, which I'm going to try and stream every day on once the PvP season goes live at twitch.tv/Iissham PvP. So give that a follow and feel free to ask me any questions about any topics really regarding WoW PvP, arena, just WoW in general, or even just stop by and say hello. I love interacting with viewers on that platform. One more thing before we talk about cooldown management and the tips I have for you with dealing with a burst. I just want to say that I've been getting a tremendous amount of comments on my videos about potentially doing a guide on how to deal with the crazy Shadowlands burst. So instead of having this directed to Resto Shaman cooldown usage, I thought it would be a good idea to open this up to the general WoW PvP public, provide tips on rotating cooldowns, team play, and my philosophy when it comes to dealing with this burst to hopefully help you out and so you can actually survive in, various situations that will be presented to you in the arena. One final thing I want to address before the video is that I've seen many comments on the WoW PvP Reddit and various YouTube videos where people think that the current state of WoW PvP is too bursty and therefore it's not conducive to learning the game because it is too fast. And how can you learn if things happen too quickly? A couple of things I want to say about that is, first of all these people who say that must be new to WoW, which is not a bad thing. However, because they're new, they would not remember Wrath of the Lich King arenas, where every game, essentially barring a few matchups, were extremely quick. Same with Cataclysm arenas in the first couple of seasons of MoP, and that is not even mentioning the legendaries and the effects that those had in the arenas of their respected expansion. What people don't realize is that having to make quicker decisions and being put in an environment when potentially one mistake, for example, not predicting a swap properly or trading out a certain defensive fast enough, will cost you the game, will quickly force you to adapt to this new meta, or you will begin to lose these games. And this fast-paced decision making will not only make your decision making better, and eventually as you learn to process the information in the arena quicker, it will lead to quicker, more decisive decisions, which will ultimately make you a better player. The players who say this is too fast are the players who probably liked having 60% plus verse in arena and every game going 10 to 15 minutes, because it is easier to learn that way. The reason why all the top PvP players hated BFA Arena is because when everyone has insane defensive and no one dies until your healing is reduced by 60% or more, you are not forced to optimize your gameplay. Playing against certain comps like DH, Frost, DK, Resto Shaman, or Holy Pally Mage Lock in BFA was super frustrating for everyone. Why? Because you are playing against people who can make 10 plus major mistakes a game, and you are literally unable to punish them for those mistakes until super deep into dampening. And do you think those long games make those players better? Of course not. They're not going to record their gameplay and sit back and analyze what they did and what could have been better. This way, with super fast games, it literally forces you to realize your mistakes and adapt. Because again, if you don't, you will continue to lose in the first 5 seconds of the match. So I'd rather have things in the classes be way overtuned than only having a few classes that are really good, and because the rest got nerfed and now they're no longer viable, and then we begin to have metas like what we did in BFA essentially, where it goes super dampening and you're unable to punish poor play. So yeah, that is my little rant about the current state of PvP, and I hope people eventually, maybe not praise this, but I want them to realize that this is better, so we don't end up going back and regressing to the metas that we had in VFA and certain other seasons where no one is able to die until 60% plus dampening. And again, I mean, there is a reason why, you know, Wrath, Cataclysm, and Mist of Pandaria are considered some of the best expansions for PvP for many individuals. But yeah, anyways, that's the little Iissham rant done, so let's jump into the video. So there are 3 things you need to consider when it comes to surviving a heavy burst meta. Number 1, your defensive cooldowns and the value that they have. Number 2, the composition you are playing and what basic protocols you have in place to react to certain situations. Number 3, my philosophy on rotating cooldowns, being more preemptive as opposed to solely reactive with cooldowns. Now, let's talk about defensive cooldowns and how to determine their value. Knowing the value of a defensive cooldown will help you to respond accordingly to bursty situations without overcommitting defensives and being left off on the worst end of the cooldown exchange, or not using enough cooldowns and dying because of that. For example, let's talk about some of my cooldowns, because I main Resto. I have Astral Shift, which is my wall, Spirit Link Totem, Grounding in certain situations, Ascendance, Trinket, and my Earthen LE Battlemaster from the Conduit. If we were to think about it, typically the longer the cooldown is, the stronger that cooldown is. For an example, Bubble, it has a 5-minute cooldown. Ascendance, it has a 3-minute cooldown. These are very strong cooldowns. However, just because a certain defensive is perceived to be better than a different cooldown, you know, comparing Astral Shift to Ascendance, most people would agree Ascendance is the better cooldown. And overall, I'd be inclined to agree. However, what if you are in a situation you can't cast or are going to get stunned and swapped to? Would Ascendance still be the better cooldown? Well, of course not. So you want to use your wall because you'd get more value out of it in that situation, because you know you're going to get stunned and swapped to, which would reduce your damage taken as opposed to increasing your healing output. So this is a thing to consider when analyzing your cooldowns. Certain cooldowns are not always better in specific situations, and it is up to you to try and figure those situations out. Another thing that is important to know is the difference between being greedy with cooldowns and being safe. When it comes to Arena, you want to figure out the least amount of cooldowns needed to react to the enemy offensives. This is typically referred to as being greedy in Arena, as you are playing very calculated and it is perceived as being greedy with your cooldowns because the enemy team maybe got you super low, you know, maybe 10-15%, but they did not kill you. It is important to be as greedy as you can with cooldowns and not overreacting, typically at the start of the game, because you don't want to give the opposing team an unwarranted advantage that they would not have if you just played, you know, super duper safe. Another way where it is important to be greedy with your cooldowns is if you're really behind in a game and the enemy team is, you know, fishing for your last major cooldown. Let's say it is Deterrence or Bubble. And you know if they get that specific cooldown on their next setup, for example, you 100% lose the game. So trying to be greedy there can really help and even swing a match in your favor, especially if the other team overcommits for that one cooldown, and now hopefully you can punish them. Another term often brought up with cooldowns is being safe, which typically means overusing cooldowns to make sure you are 100% safe, there's 0% chance of you dying. Typically, it is good to be safe in Arena if your team has a commanding cooldown advantage or you are one setup away from winning the game. You want to be safe to ensure you get the win without throwing away the game by not using a cooldown and dying. Remember, when implementing these playstyles, it is important that you don't get too greedy, like not wanting to trinket link a 1-second CC and letting someone die, which I definitely have done, or overreacting to opposing cooldowns and losing the next setup. It takes a lot of practice, but once you become more aware of it, it will definitely help you out a lot. Now, let's jump into this clip. This game, the enemy team was doing pretty big damage. They popped Avenging Wrath, Pillar of Frost. My team got decently low because I decided to go for a Hex play. Now let's look at the cooldown usage from both teams. I used Spirit Walker's Grace, Wall, and Ascendance to deal with the burst they did as I went for a Hex. However, in exchange, the other team used Trinket on the Priest, which is a 2-minute cooldown. The Red Paladin used Bubble, which is a 5-minute cooldown. The Red Pally also used Avenging Wrath, which is a 3-minute cooldown. DK used Pillar of Frost, 1-minute cooldown, and the Death Knight also used Anti-Magic Shell, which is a 1-minute cooldown. So if we were to add up the cooldown usage of both teams, my team used cooldowns equal to 5.5 minutes, but the other team used cooldowns equal to 12 minutes of cooldown usage. So obviously my team got the much better trade, thus giving my team all the momentum and allowed us to snowball the team until we eventually won. The comp you play and the protocol/strats you have in place or don't have set up is going to determine how easily and comfortable you are with dealing with and surviving huge bursts from opposing teams. I want to stress it is important to play a composition you are familiar with or to play a comp until you get familiar with it. Ideally, you'd want to play with people and partners who you can grow with and improve with, because if you have a consistent team, your protocols for dealing with specific comps are going to get better and better. And honestly, the majority of the time, it isn't individual plays that win you a game. It is your team play, sometimes called team synergy, and how well you work together. If I were to look back on my times pushing rank 1, I usually do the best with players I've played with for a long time. Like Yuji, my Red Pally, who I've been with, and I've gotten rank 1 with a bunch of times. We know how each other play and what we want to do, and because of hours and hours of gameplay with each other, we know how to react to certain situations even after not playing with one another for a while. I hope I am stressing the importance of trying to find a consistent team. Anyways, what I mean by protocols is figuring out what your team, let's use me as an example, and my Windwalker, Shadow Priest, Wrestle Shaman that I got rank 1 with last season. Eventually, we figured out a script of what to do in certain games and certain situations against specific comps. Sometimes these strats may come naturally and relatively quickly to your team, like switching who the kill target is. And other times, it takes many games of trying new ways to rotate cooldowns or doing different things to make the win more likely. One matchup that my Windwalker SP had basically 100% win rate against was Rogue Mage Priest. We eventually got to the point where we were confident queuing into any RM Priest on NA and winning. But this was all because we had established great protocols. For example, if they opened my Priest, we determined he should Trinket and use Fade, allowing me to hold Trinket, and while he is faded, that gives my Windwalker enough time to get out of CC to then help out my Shadow Priest. We then had protocols for specifically how to CC the Rogue Mage Priest, and then we also had strats in place to how we would react if the Rogue Trinketed or if it was the Mage that Trinketed or Priest. We also had strats for if anyone on the team overcommits cooldowns, and what happens if we ourselves overcommit cooldowns. It is important to have these things in place because there's nothing worse than winning a game and accidentally overlapping cooldowns with your team and losing it in the end because of that. So get with your partners, get together with your LFG groups, and determine if you are having a hard time against specific comps, who is using what cooldowns, who is doing what if this offensive gets popped, who does what if the healer is CC'd and one of your partners needs help. Coming up with even a basic game plan will go a long way, because one thing that is great about a basic game plan is it is easy to adapt if you need. So keep that in mind, friends. Okay, my last point, which will help you out a lot with the burst meta. Being more preemptive as opposed to reactive with cooldowns. What I mean is trying to predict when the enemy team is going to do a big offensive go and using a cooldown before they do their big go to mitigate that damage in their offensive window or disrupting their setup somehow. This is being preemptive. Being reactive, on the other hand, is waiting for them to use their offensive cooldowns with CC on the healer or whatever, and then saying, oh boy, I need to use this cooldown now and this cooldown now, and I'm on the back foot. And maybe commonly for beginners, it's I used this and oh, it wasn't enough, or I was too slow and now I'm dead or my partners are. Being preemptive has its pros and cons, but if you do it correctly, it will yield insane results. Some of you might be thinking, oh, if you just use the defensive early, can't they just wait it out and do their go after? Well, yes, they can, and that is a potential downside with doing this. It is a high risk, high reward situation. If you pull it off, it might make a losing situation into a winning one, or further your lead in a game you're already winning. Look at this game against Double Sub Rogue. First of all, Double Sub Rogue is a super bursty comp right now, so if any of my teammates mess up, we could be toast. The game is playing out and I see the rogue step to me. Now, if a rogue steps to you, there is usually 3 things he was trying to do. CC you quickly and get back to your teammates, swap to you and do a lot of damage, or they were trying to land a kick. Since I was not casting here, I predicted that the rogue was going to do a swap to me, so I walled as soon as I saw him near my character, and look, he stuns me and goes into the wall. Now, if I didn't have that 40% damage reduction, I may have taken a lot more damage and felt like I needed to trink a wall or get my teammates to use cooldown for me. Because of this prediction, I was able to save a lot of my cooldowns and feel really safe, and since the opposing team lost their momentum, we were able to snowball them and win. So this is just one example, but doing a small thing like that can save you 1 or 2 cooldowns, and those cooldowns later on in the game mean a lot. Maybe you ended up dying because you didn't have one of those cooldowns you lost because you had to react to a certain situation as opposed to being preemptive. Many classes have the opportunity to do things like that, with monks having wall, priests having fade, reds having their physical parry. Another way that using cooldowns preemptively is strong is that it can force the enemy team to delay a go, giving you time to get another cooldown back or one of your partners to get a cooldown in order to peel you that can save you later on. Or it gives you the opportunity to do a counter go now that they are waiting out a specific cooldown, putting your team in the driver's seat of the match, and maybe since you have momentum now because they're sitting back, the other team may not even want to commit to their original strategy because they're on the defensive now. Overall, you do not want to do this all the time in every single situation because a good team could just bait out a cooldown and kill you afterwards. However, if you're able to implement this strategy with your cooldowns correctly, it can win you and your team games. And there is my general guide on how to deal with burst. If you have any questions regarding anything I said, ask a question down below or talk to me about it on my stream at twitch.tv/Iissham_PvP. Reminder that I plan on streaming a lot of things this coming Tuesday, so check it out when I go live and we can all hang out. Remember to sub to my YouTube channel on your way out, and thanks for watching.